All right. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Carter Schummer with Soundwave Consulting Incorporated. Welcome to another edition of our live stream event here on LinkedIn. If you're following us on YouTube, please be sure to hit the like button. If you hit subscribe, you'll be given advance notice of our future events. Today, we're going to be talking about incident response plan testing. Oddly enough, this is the only control that has in its naming convention an how you operationalize a control. So when you're talking about whether it's CMMC or other security frameworks, you not only have to have the control in place, but you have to be able to demonstrate that you've operationalized it. And for this particular one, in the newest version for NIST 800-171 special publication, which is titled Protecting Controlled and Classified Information in Non-Federal Systems and Organizations, in the newest revision 363 is actually incident response plan testing. It's being defined as basically how the organization tests its capabilities to determine the effectiveness of its existing capabilities to withstand a cyber attack. With us today is Steve Ortman with Ortman Consulting. Steve, welcome to our show. And if you don't mind, if you could tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your company.
Sure. Thank you. I'm the owner of Ortman Consulting. We've been around for about 15 years. We provide cybersecurity solutions to the federal government, mostly in the domain of cross-domain security, access and transfer, network security, and data protection security. So we've been doing that for a while. Our main customers are the DoD, DHS, and the Intel community. We're about 25 people strong. We are active in Virginia, DC, Maryland, and Central New York, the New York State area.
Oh, great. Now, well, again, welcome to our show, and thank you for your introduction. So I think it's always important to understand like where to start. And before you actually did this as one of Soundwave's Camo clients, have you ever performed an incident response plan test before?
No, definitely not.
And if I can ask, how did the test, the actual live fire test, compare to what you thought might have occurred?
It kind of went the way I expected. In other words, there were a lot of surprises. And I was expecting that because A, we've never done it before. B, we had the IRP document, but my background's in the military. The document only tells you so much. You really kind of understand and see things firsthand when you start walking through the document with a real scenario. And the old mantra of training like you fight really comes true. So it was definitely a big learning experience.
And who all participated in the actual live fire exercise?
Basically, our core management team. So myself, our CTO, Teresa, our business operations manager, Wendell, and our lead administrator, who does a lot of back office work as well, and some of our cybersecurity activities, Olivia. Okay, great.
Now, when this was done, and for context for those people that are watching this, Soundwave was there in the capacity of providing oversight. And as you went through the incident response plan template that was provided to you, there was a point in time throughout the exercise where you're obviously taking notes. You had it in hard copy. One of the things that I think is very important for a lot of people to understand, even if you have an incident response plan, do you actually have it in hard copy format? Because if your system is compromised and the system is where you're keeping your incident response plan, how do you really plan to be able to exercise it? So it was very impressive that you, not only yourself, but other members of your emergency response team all had copies and understood what the roles and responsibilities were for each one. So if you don't mind, can you kind of share for the audience, like once under that scenario, an event was defined as an incident, what'd you do first with regards to who were you trying to contact first at that point?
Sure. So our IRP has a flow chart in it. And during the process, we sort of walk through that flow chart and walk through the steps that are tied to that. There's different chapters and segments of our IRP. So we kind of jumped right in and looked at the flow chart and said, okay, we now are starting this process. And one of the first things we did was starting contacting various authorities. So one of the first steps we had was to contact our local police department. In our case, we're based in Alexandria, Virginia. And so we picked up the phone, we called him, and walked through the rest of the process kind of like that. I will say there were a lot of logistic steps that we also talked about, sort of preliminary logistic steps. Who do we call? Like how, when something is determined as an incident, how do we notify the team of this, and what do we do then? Do we physically go somewhere? How do we address that very initial sort of startup phase? And so there were some interesting discussions we had at that point as well.
So when you were contacting the local police, were you just calling 911, or what level of detail or what level of depth did you had to go to before you were actually able to find the right individual or right business unit within the law enforcement agency that would be supporting you as local law enforcement?
Sure. So part of our IP preparation, we did go through the various contacts that would be necessary in an incident response scenario. So we had a lot of contacts already in our document, and we basically started with those. In the case of Alexandria, there was a contact we called, got a voicemail, so that kind of didn't really get us very far. So we did some on-the-fly research. Who else should we call? What other agencies within the city exist?
Mm-hmm.
And we made some additional calls and actually got to a point where we were able to explain the scenario to the authority. They gave us some advice on what to do next, and we were able to kind of check that box.
Okay. And after that step was completed, what did your organization do next?
So then one of the next steps were to there's an FBI. There are various websites you have to go to report your incidents to different authorities. So there's FBI, DOD, and DHS as well. They provide phone numbers, if I'm not mistaken, but basically their recommended process is to go to their incident response site. They have different types of sites,
mm-hmm.
and then record the incident in there. And so we actually did that and put tests on everything to make sure it was very clear before we submitted anything that this was a test, but just again, walk through those steps. So those, as far as the authorities go, I don't remember exactly the who we contacted first, second, third, but that was kind of the authority section of the IRP. We went through that in a lot of detail. We also talked to our insurance agency. So there, we also had a lot of good lessons learned. We have sort of a primary umbrella coverage. We contacted that office first.
Mm-hmm.
They were very helpful. They gave us a lot of good information. They were very complimentary, actually, that we did what that we were doing this. And then they provided us a list of secondary support services that we would have to contact to continue our IRP process. So
what inclined you to actually even contact your insurance provider?
Well, the IRP plan recommends that or requires that. So we have a policy which is required by most of our customers for cybersecurity incident response. So I guess that's kind of where it starts. So without that, you don't have anyone to contact. So we do have that in place today. It's one of those things, again, where lessons learned, you buy a policy and then what? And so the IRP
mm-hmm.
was really instructive for us to kind of understand what the policy entails and what's on us to perform and to take action when we have an incident that we need to respond to.
So the fact that myself and one of my team members was privileged to be there during that exercise, one of the things that I found very interesting is the fact that when you were contacting these external organizations, you had it on speakerphone so everybody in the room could have an understanding of how that dialogue was going back and forth. Was the representative for your insurance carrier advising that he's done this for a number of years, and he was surprised, albeit pleasantly, that they were actually being included in that test?
Yep. Very true. Yep. It was good to hear, that we got some experts that were kind of on our side and patting us on the back.
Well, so once you made that initial call, which a lot of these insurance organizations have, you have like a hotline number. And then from that point, from what I remember, the individual who was being, again, very helpful, he understood there was a test. He was treating it like a live exercise to the best that he could without actually pulling the trigger, defining it as an actual claim. But then from that point, he provided you a website that would give you access to your what's called a panel. For those of you that are not familiar with what a panel is, when you have a cyber liability insurance coverage, you are provided a battery of different subject matter experts in a variety of different areas of expertise, such as that they will have attorneys that they've already pre-vetted and have an agreed upon rate with, forensics and incident response teams, breach notification, credit monitoring, all of those things. So for the purpose of what we were looking to accomplish at that point, obviously you would want to know how to get in touch with the incident response firms. Can you maybe share with the audience some of the lessons learned and maybe some of the heartaches that you had experienced when trying to go through that process?
Sure. So it all starts with I'll call it that list of all
Mhm.
those providers. Luckily, our insurance provider gave us very detailed information about every single option we had. There's a list of lawyers, and then there's kind of like a public content, and then also a claims contact. And so we went through that list. Again, lessons learned, we hadn't really gone through that before. So while we were going through the exercise, we decided, all right, these are probably the contacts we'll like to work with. And so we picked the ones we thought were most likely to be helpful for us and started, again, dialing the phone. So the first contacts that we went through was for, if I remember right, sort of cybersecurity forensic sort of analysis and
Mhm.
support. And I won't name names, but the first company we contacted, and the second one, if I'm correct, kind of dropped the ball. We contacted their hotline, and in one case, I think we were just put on forwarding hell. So we went through one person that forwarded us, the second person, then eventually no one picked up. So that was kind of a bust. And then the second company we contacted, they were. It kind of sounded like we got the tier 4 support. So they really didn't know what we were talking about.
Mhm.
We kind of explained things over and over again, and they were a little bit not necessarily evasive, but just weren't very helpful. And so that didn't give us a really good warm fuzzy. At that point, we decided, at this point, we're going to have to maybe regroup and look at this in more detail. And we decided again on a third provider that we were going to go with at that point. But that was one of the big lessons learned, is that even though your insurance company provides you these vetted sources, there's obviously going to be some quality differences between them as well.
So on the topic of this being a test, just for context for the audience, in those first two experiences that you had, do you happen to recall ballpark how much time you had to invest in basically not even being able to move forward with either of those two organizations?
Sure. I mean, all told, probably each one, with discussions and whatnot, is a good half hour each. So it might have been a little shorter being actually on the phone,
Mhm.
but you have to do some preliminary work and some post work. And so it was definitely a waste of time, about half hour each. So you could say about an hour was wasted, doing futile kind of contact efforts.
Okay. And as a result of going through the totality of that exercise, were there anything, was there any one particular item in that chain of events that stood out where you were able to see the value in having individuals that are experienced in this providing that level of oversight to you?
Um, are you talking about Soundwave specifically, or is that?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. So you've been our guide through the whole CMMC process. So this wasn't just a one-time deal where we asked you to come in and help us with the IRP. So we've been going through the CMMC journey, if you want to call it that, for a good long while. And so this was just a natural extension of our existing working relationship, which has been excellent so far. And I think having someone that understands how an IRP should work, how you should be testing it. You provided us a scenario. When we kind of might have been drifting off the rails in our IRP response, you kind of guided us back to where we need to go. So all in all, it was invaluable.
Oh, well, certainly appreciate the kind words.
Sure.
For those that have yet to go through this exercise, uh, one of the things I think it's important for people to understand is that when you're making these reports online, one of the required entities has a little bit of a nuance on how you actually can even submit the actual information, even if it's a test. Can you maybe share with the audience your experience in having to use a medium assurance digital certificate?
Oh, good point. Yeah, so I forget which agency that was, but we did
That
have
was
to.
that was DoD. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yep. So I believe that was something we prepared for ahead of time because of again, we had worked on the IRP document before we did the exercise, and so that was an area where your advice kind of saved the day, because at the end of if we didn't have that certificate, and it's very easy to get one. There are different methods of doing that, and so we were able to kind of prepare and have that ready to go when the test actually came.
Wonderful. So now that you've gone through all this one time, because obviously we're going to probably plan to do this in about roughly a year,
Yep.
again with you and your team, what lessons learned, what would you say like top two things that you were able to do obtain as a takeaway from this exercise that hopefully, in your opinion, should be able to make next year's exercise more effective and more efficient?
I think we really nailed down a lot of the tactics. So the IRP document from a strategic perspective was 100% or 90%. I think all the steps were there we needed to do, but the tactical operational steps of, how do we get together? Where do we decide to go to? If the computers aren't working, how do we do these very tactical things with you're actually in a scenario? Those are the lessons learned that I think we'll be able to apply much better and have a smoother experience next time. Who's our cyber incident response team that we're going to contact? All those things, those tactical steps and decisions are now a lot more defined.
Wonderful. Well, we always love to be able to hear how any organization, whether it's a Soundwave client or other, is able to improve their operations, because at the end of the day, that is going to not only improve the resilience, but also reduce their total costs of ownership. One of the things that I think also anybody that is participating in this event is one of the action items that I had identified that I provided some recommendations to Ortman Consulting on is, if you do not have a charge code for crisis management, you need to make sure that you're going ahead and doing that. And the reason why is the majority of these policies actually have, it varies, but on average about $1,000 per day per person that is involved at the request of the insurance organization. So as an example, if Ortman Consulting were to file a claim, in addition to loss of business operations, things along those lines, having to be reimbursed for incident response services and things like that, by capturing that time with a unique charge code, you now have a clear trail of how much time is being allocated and what is that time valued at to each organization, whether it was yourself or your operations team, because in that aggregate, that could equate to thousands upon thousands of dollars that you would then either be applying towards your deductible or being able to recapture as the actual claim itself.
Yep. And that's something we did as well. So a very good point.
Yeah. Well, Steve, thank you so much for taking the time to be able to share your experiences as a small business. I'm going to keep the floor open for any potential questions that we may have from audience members, and we'll just keep the floor open for a couple of minutes and we'll conclude at that point.
Awesome.
All right. Well, I certainly don't want to monopolize any more of your time, Steve, than I have to. So again, thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and sign off. And until next month, hope everybody has a great day.
All right.
See you
Thanks,
next
everybody.
month.
Thank you, Carter. I appreciate it.